What is it that causes a man to go from devout Muslim to being one of the biggest critics of Islam and eventually finding his way to Eastern Orthodox Christianity? In this video, we're talking about Ridvan Aydemir, who is known online as Apostate Prophet. But for the rest of this video, I'll simply be referring to him as AP. And AP has had quite the journey in his life. He is a person who deals with death threats. He is a person who deals with lawsuits from the Turkish government, alienation and estrangement from his family. And despite all this, AP is someone who has amassed a following of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people across the internet. And so buckle in while we discuss one of the most dramatic spiritual journeys that has been documented in the modern internet. And so it all started for AP in Germany. AP was born in Germany, and he was born to Turkish immigrant parents. And his parents, despite living in Germany, were still very nationalistic to Turkey and to Islam. And so AP's father would teach him a lot of things about Islam at their house, and he would indoctrinate AP. And he would say to AP that non-Muslims are disbelievers, and they're not people who could be trusted. He says to him that Jews in particular are specifically enemies of Islam. And his father recounts to AP a hadith, which is a teaching in Islam, that before the end times, all of the Jews must be eliminated before the end times can occur. And his father will recount to him that this hadith also says that Jews will hide behind trees or hide behind rocks, and the trees and the rocks themselves will say, hey, there is a Jewish person behind me. Go ahead and eliminate them. And he recounts these stories from his father as being really scary and creepy. And this, of course, was something that extended past Jews to all non-Muslims, because his father also said that Christians are treacherous and they ought to be fought. And so this created in AP immediate cognitive dissonance, because after he would be indoctrinated by his father, moments later he would end up finding himself in one of his classrooms filled with primarily Christian Germans. And so there was this contrast where at home, AP's father's language would be degrading and dehumanizing, and he would talk about any non-Muslims in this sort of way. But he would contrast that to the Western culture that he experienced in Germany, especially in his classroom, with an undertone of tolerance and getting along with one another and accepting each other's differences. And AP claims he would experience much more racism from his family and what he would call his own people than he did from the Germans during the time in which he grew up in. But he didn't last in Germany for long, because in 2006, his family decided to move back to Turkey. And so they dragged him along out of Germany into Turkey. And here in Turkey, he had his mandatory military service. And it was during this time that he really started fully immerse himself into Islam. And while his parents were Sufi, which is known to be a more mystical branch of Islam, AP himself found himself drawn to Sunni Islam, which is a bit more legalistic. And his moving towards Sunni Islam demonstrates in AP a personal interest in Islam, because he is moving away from the sort of Islamic mysticism that is fundamental to his father's faith, to something a bit more legalistic. He did this on his own. And it was at this time that AP decided that he would practice Islam devoutly, and he would really get into it. And he became learned in Islamic texts and traditions, and he learned a lot about the more scholarly side of Islam. And shortly after this happened, he started to become a little bit disillusioned with the teachings of Islam. And so he began a brief flirtation with revolutionary communism. And he was hoping that revolutionary communism had the answers and that it would fix things in the world. And AP is someone who acknowledges this brief flirtation with communism as a mistake, and he would say that it didn't work out. And so this shows us that AP's life is characterized by this constant seeking out of a framework that can not only explain reality to him, but offer the solutions to the problems that he experiences in his life and the lives of those around him. And while he was in Turkey, he notes that he found life a little bit harder in Turkey than he found it in Germany, and he preferred Germany, and he would say that he preferred the people in Germany than he preferred the people in Turkey. And all of his studying into Islam and the Islamic literature, AP says, is what led him to eventually doubting Islam. And it was ironically his study of Islam that undermined his faith in Islam. And he recounts this incident where he was speaking to the girlfriend of one of his friends, and he was quoting a verse from the Quran to her. It's Surah 434, which states that women are to be disciplined by their men if it was deemed fit by her husband. And when AP approached his friend's girlfriend about this Quranic verse, he asked her, well, what do you think about it? And he recalls her saying, yeah, that's true. That verse does exist in the Quran. But then when AP asked her about the reverse scenario of whether or not it would be appropriate for a woman to discipline her husband, AP recounts that his friend's girlfriend went silent. And this was an experience that stuck with AP. And he considered this experience to be indicative of the sort of gender equality that he perceives to exist in Islam. And he was also really distraught with the reaction to 9/11 during his time in Turkey, because he would notice that the community response to 9/11 in the Turkish community was along the lines of the United States deserving what came to them. And this is something that was justified. And AP had a moral revulsion to the sort of reaction that he noticed in the Turkish people. And his conscience was sort of leading him into tension with the Turkish culture in which he inherited. And then he later on reflects about his time in Turkey and his time in Islam as saying, and I quote, he doesn't understand how he lived that way. And after he had this sort of tension between his conscience and his inherited beliefs, he finally made the decision to completely abandon Islam. And this created a lot of devastation in his family. And it severely destabilized the relationships he had with his immediate family members. And he recounts a conversation he had with one of his friends that he's been friends with for 5 years, one of his Muslim friends saying to him that he will cut off AP's head and throw it into Taksim Square, which is a popular square over in Turkey. And the government, the Turkish government, had quite a strong response to AP's abandonment of Islam as well, because the Turkish government were putting out lawsuits against AP for his criticism of Islam. And this kind of shed some light into the way that Islam is treated in some countries, in particular Turkey, where it's seen as a nationality and not just a religion. These things are almost synonymous in some of these regions. In Turkey, to be Turkish is to be Muslim, and to be Muslim is to be Turkish. And his apostasy, which is his leaving of Islam, was not just seen as someone leaving their religion, it was seen as treason in Turkey. And so this broader ex-Muslim experience kind of shows us how ex-Muslims as a whole might be led towards isolation and shame for questioning Islam, especially if they live in one of these Islamic countries. And as a response to this pushback that AP had is when he decided that he would immigrate to the United States. and he was seeking freedom, and he wanted to live freely and live his life in the secular West. And so fast forward a little bit, he launches his YouTube channel in 2017, at least the oldest public video on his channel that's up right now was posted on November 10th of 2017. And his mission statement from his own channel is to factually and fairly criticize Islam with a healthy dose of satire as well. And he had really significant growth with his channel. And very quickly did he start to amass a sort of following and appreciation for his work. And he's monetizing his work using Patreon and funding from his website. And I think he also gets revenue from YouTube as well. And some of the core criticisms that Apostate Prophet, that AP has of Islam are: one, apostasy laws, which is a law that exists in some Islamic countries, that anyone who leaves Islam is to be put to death. And this exists till today in at least 10 Islamic countries. He criticizes Islam for promoting violence in its texts, specifically the Quran and some of the hadiths. The experience he had with his friend's girlfriend also has him making criticisms of the treatment of women in the Islamic context. He will also criticize Islam as being not only a religion, but an identity. And he will criticize it as being a tribal or national identity, not just a faith. He will also criticize Islam for the sort of childhood trauma that he endured when his father was telling him about how the Jews would hide behind trees and rocks close to the end times, and that these trees and rocks would kind of rat out those Jews to the Muslims so that they can be eliminated. He critiques Islam from a historical perspective, and he will say that there is a negative impact overall on humanity caused by Islam. He will say that Islam, while it has unified some desperate tribes throughout history, that he thinks that it's done more harm to humanity than good. And he will also criticize Islam for being fundamentally incompatible with the West. He will say that it clashes with Western secular values and that these two things cannot coexist. Sometimes he takes a very satirical approach in his criticism of Islam, and he'll use kind of humor as a weapon so he could disarm the sacred cows that kind of exist around religion, in particular Islam. And this humor that he brings to some of his work will assist in community building and help sort of build a bond between the people who are attracted to his brand, who exist in large part of ex-Muslims as well. And he makes an observation about Islam in America. He'll say, Islam in America is the most, and I quote, un-Islamic Islam in the world. He thinks that Islam in America doesn't give Westerners and Americans an accurate representation of what Islam really is and the way it really exists in the countries from which it originated. And so this creates a disconnect, he will say, between the benign and tame version of Islam that Westerners might interface with in the West, with the historical and primarily Middle Eastern fundamentalist interpretations of Islam. And it's after this point that AP enters his era of debates. And one of his most notable early debates was a debate he had with a Muslim named Daniel Hakikachu. And he had this debate in June 2020. And this debate was really notable because it was during this debate that AP's debate opponent, Daniel Hakikachu, confirmed that there should be capital punishment for people who leave Islam, otherwise known as apostates. And there should be stoning and lashing to respond to people who fornicate within Islam. Fornication is just having sex outside of marriage. And so what Daniel Hakikachu did in his debate against AP is Hakikachu successfully demonstrated the sort of claims that AP would lobby against Islam. Here in this debate, you had a Muslim himself, Daniel Hakikachu, saying, yes, we believe in these sort of things. And we think that Sharia law should have lashings of people who have sex outside of marriage, and who should put people who leave Islam they should have capital punishment. But AP since then has kind of expanded beyond just making criticisms of Islam, because very recently he had a debate with Andrew Wilson on Zionism and whether Christians in America should be supportive of Israel or not. And so he is now starting to expand kind of past just criticism of Islam to having discussions about other things regarding geopolitics and religion as a whole as well. And so from AP's YouTube bio, he says he has some funny quotes from his critics, primarily Islamic apologists. Ali Dawa says that AP is the enemy of Islam. Yasir Khadi says he is a pathetic murtad. Jazid Lipham says he is literally shaitan, which is just Satan in Arabic. And the Muslim apologist, Muhammad Hijab, says he is one of the great anti-Islamic polemicists. A polemicist is just someone who makes criticisms of other religions. And due to the contentious nature and controversial nature of AP's work, he was banned from Twitter in 2019, both his ex-Muslim Prophet account as well as his apostate Ridvan account. And I'm not sure if they're still ongoing, but he of course had to deal with legal battles with the Turkish government, and he is continuously dealing and facing death threats. And this milieu he finds himself in, this milieu of debates that AP is currently engaged in, shows us something interesting, because in his debate with Daniel Hakikachu, what one could observe is that all of the people who are supporters of Daniel Hakikachu, his Muslim debate opponent, thought that Daniel Hakikachu won their debate, whereas all of the people who supported AP thought that AP won the debate. And so this shows us, it's a microcosm into the phenomena that rhetorical skill and the ability to own your opponent, to dismantle your opponent, might appear as being just as impactful, if not more impactful, than the substantive argumentation presented to many viewers. Because this is something that is seen across debates, where a lot of people who view debates will be focused a lot more on what is perceived to be rhetorical skill and wit, and whether or not someone owned someone else in the debate, and less on the substance of the arguments themselves. After this, AP recently had a very unexpected turn in his career. And this turn, of course, is his interest into Eastern Orthodox Christianity. His wife is alleged to have converted to Christianity in 2024. And AP is someone who will have a lot of interactions with Christians. One of his most collaborated with apologist, David Wood, who is someone that collaborates a lot with AP, is a Christian apologist. And so AP has had this constant exposure to Christianity through allegedly his wife's conversion, and through dealing with and interacting with Christian apologists. And he's been publicly signaling his interest in Eastern Orthodox. He is now a catechumen. A catechumen is someone who is not yet fully baptized into the Eastern Orthodox Church, but is someone who is on their path to being baptized in the Eastern Orthodox Church. And since he's sort of announced this publicly, he's been wearing crosses publicly in his live streams, and he's been publicly explaining his appeal towards Christianity, saying that as an atheist, the perspectives of atheism are cold and chilly and meaningless, And he didn't want to live his life that way. And he said that meaning and serenity are things that exist in the Christian paradigm that are missing from the chilly perspectives of atheism. And some people in his community will claim that they've seen this coming a long time ago, and it was only a matter of time until AP had an interest in Christianity and would ultimately convert to Christianity. But AP's recent interest in Christianity exists in stark contrast to his devotion to Islam and eventual leaving of Islam, because his more recent experience with Christianity has a lot more to do with the people he's interacting with, has a lot more to do with his wife and the experience of being a Christian and the truth of Christianity through community and through personal experience, as opposed to his more legalistic and hyper scholarly approach to Islam that he had when he became very devout in Islam after returning once again after moving to Turkey, and his eventual leaving of Islam since then as well. There is this contrast between this intellectual approach to the truth to now he has that coupled with a more experiential and communal approach as well. And he announced that he was going to be a catechumen in the Eastern Orthodox Church in March of 2025. He noted in this post that after a 10-year period of atheism and after 2 years of actively searching for the truth, he's finally settled into the Eastern Orthodox communion of churches. And some claim that his 2024 visit to Israel had an impact on him. Some claim that when he visited Israel in 2024, that this experience created a softening of his heart and led him to find solace in Christianity. And AP's decision to become a catechumen in the Eastern Orthodox Church led to a lot of very intense reactions from his community. You have the ex-Muslim community who had mixed responses to his announcement of being a catechumen. Some of them say that this is going to cause immense harm to ex-Muslims because AP is perceived by them as going from one Abrahamic religion to another, and a lot of these people in his community are atheists, and so they see this as being harmful to ex-Muslims. Some of them will speculate that the reason why Apostate Prophet decided that he'd want to become an Eastern Orthodox Christian is for safety. They say that there's not a lot of numbers and not a lot of community in being and existing as an atheist, but if he joins a pre-established church with a pre-established community, that it'll be more safe for him physically to be a Christian than to be an atheist. This is a speculation and a claim lobbied against AP. Some people will say he did it for money, because some people will say that Christians really love a story of an ex-Muslim or an ex-atheist joining Christianity, and they see these converts as trophies. And so these ex-Muslims and his ex-Muslim community makes this claim that Christians will now shower him with money and shower him with donations for becoming a Christian. Some of them speculate yet that this is a genuine belief for AP, that he genuinely is actually interested in and believes in the Christian God, and that his conversion is sincere. Others still will say he's doing this out of fear. He's scared, and that's why he converted to Eastern Orthodox Christianity. And some say that he had a much better impact when he was unaffiliated with any religion, that he was able to expose religion for what it was and to put religion behind many ex-Muslims. And there are some public figures who have also been vocal, and they've criticized AP for his moving from atheism to Christianity, notably Matt Dillahunty, who has been active and on speaking about atheism for decades now, comes to mind. Meanwhile, if you contrast this response from the ex-Muslim subreddit to the response of Eastern Orthodox Christian subreddits and communities online, there is a huge difference, because in the Eastern Orthodox communities online, people will say glory be to God for his conversion. They're extremely supportive and happy with the moving from atheism to Eastern Orthodox Christianity that AP is going through. They have shown him overwhelming support and welcome. And they have an interest in his completion of making a full conversion to Eastern Orthodox Christianity and eventually becoming baptized. And so while atheists in his community are disappointed oftentimes, they're sad and they're angry that he's moving from atheism to Eastern Orthodox Christianity, a lot of Eastern Orthodox Christians and Christians as a whole are delighted to see this change. And so what are some patterns that exist in the story of Apostate Prophet? Apostate Prophet is a person who has a history of having an all-in approach to his life, where when he was a devout Muslim, he was a devout Muslim. He took it very seriously. To then moving to communism for a brief period of time, he was seriously looking for a comprehensive and robust system. And then when he was an atheist, he took atheism with as much seriousness. And now that he is a Christian, he's taking that seriously as well. And so he has this very all-in approach to the truth and this all-in approach to finding the true worldview. But also, he had a past where he was making a lot of these changes intellectually, where he would study Islam and decide that it wasn't true. And then he would use his intellect to kind of seek out what's true. To now, not only does he still retain that element in his search for truth, he is also relying a bit more on experience. That's why he will say things like, atheism is cold and nihilistic and chilly and meaningless, but Christianity is, since it's filled with serenity and meaning. And he is having experiences with other Christians and dealing with other Christians. And so he has this more now holistic approach to the discovery of the truth that not only relies solely and specifically on the intellect, but also additionally on the sort of experiences that he's having personally and with other people. This demonstrates as well, AP story demonstrates as well the toll, the psychological toll of childhood trauma. And it shows us how coming to Christianity may eventually, ultimately provide him solace from the torment that he's kind of been dealing with, both in terms of the cognitive dissonance that he has as a child, as well as the external pushback that he's been getting. Christianity may offer a solace and a solace for these experiences that he had. And so this leaves us with a few more questions about AP and where things are going to go for him from here. Will he continue to critique Islam from a Christian perspective, or will he kind of move in a different direction? We've already seen him engaging with different things, and his content has moved from being a bit more concise and brief to him engaging a lot more in these extended live streams. And this is something that he's also received criticism about, because some people say that they missed when his content was short and concise, and they don't have the patience for these lengthy live streams that he's been engaging in lately. And what does this mean for his previous atheist followers? Are they going to continue to support him and engage with the new direction he's going to be going in? Or are they people who are going to be one of his critics? And this is poetic in a way, because when Apostate Prophet started his brand, the name Apostate referenced his leaving of Islam. But now there's an added layer to the name Apostate Prophet, because not only is it Islam that he left, now he's also a apostate, quote unquote, to atheists as well. And so there are ongoing risks to his brand. His brand is kind of in a place right now of instability, where his audience may be shifting a little bit, including a bit more Christians, and having a few more atheists kind of fall away from engaging with his brand. But his story is far from over. And his story reflects a broader spiritual restlessness that exists, especially in the the middle period, or the middle ground between Middle Eastern culture or Far Eastern culture and the culture of the West, because there is now a greater exposure to the values of the West in the Middle East and in the Far East that didn't exist there before, and to a much lesser extent vice versa, where Westerners are being more exposed to ideas from the Middle East, they're being more exposed to Islam than they ever were before, and even the Far East than they ever were before. So in a way, thought has kind of become more global, and in thought becoming a bit more global, we're noticing a bit more restlessness because people are becoming more aware of the sort of options that they have and what they believe and what they believe fundamentally. And his story kind of mirrors this tension between the perspectives of these different geographies that were once a lot more isolated than they are now. And so, what did you think of AP's transformation? Do you think that he is going to stick with Eastern Orthodoxy? Or do you think this is ultimately something that he will again leave and maybe he will join another Christian denomination like Oriental Orthodoxy or Protestantism, return to Islam, or I'm sorry, not Islam, return to atheism, or go somewhere else? So let me know what you think. And that's all for this one. This has been the story of Apostate Prophet. And we'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.